The moment I knew my marriage was truly over didn't happen in a courtroom or during a screaming fight. It happened in a movie theater lobby, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little tired, while my husband held a tub of popcorn like it was an anchor and stared at my boss like she was oxygen. We were supposed to be having our monthly date night, the kind we scheduled on purpose because life kept eating everything else. Work, laundry, bills, the quiet distance that shows up when you stop checking in and start only updating. Jerome and I were standing near the counter when I saw her. Julia, my boss, 39, sharp posture, a calm presence that made the whole room feel organized just by existing in it. She was dressed casually, but somehow still looked like someone who owned her own life. Beside her was a young man, maybe mid-20s, laughing at something she said. I didn't think much of it at first. People go to movies. Bosses have lives. That should have been the end of the thought. But then Jerome saw her too. His whole body stiffened like a wire pulled too tight. The popcorn in his hands tilted. His eyes locked on Julia so fast it was almost embarrassing. Except the embarrassment wasn't his. It was mine. Because I felt it like a cold hand closing around my throat. I watched my husband forget I was standing right next to him. He took a step forward. Just one. Small, automatic, like his feet knew where to go before his brain caught up. I grabbed his arm. Jerome, I whispered, trying to sound normal even as my pulse started sprinting. What are you doing? He didn't look at me. I just want to say hi, he mumbled, eyes fixed on her. Hi, like she was a friend, like she was ours. Like she belonged anywhere in our marriage. I pulled him away from the lobby doors, away from the ticket counter, away from the version of my life that was about to crack open. And when we got to the car, he finally turned his face toward me, irritated, defensive, almost offended. Why wouldn't you let me talk to her? He demanded. That was the first time I realized the real problem wasn't Julia. The real problem was that my husband had started building a world where she mattered more than me, and he didn't even know he was doing it out loud. My name is... and I'm 27. I used to think being married young meant you got to grow up alongside someone, like you were building the same house, from the same blueprint, learning where the walls should go together. Jerome and I met in the most ordinary way possible, through mutual friends at a small backyard get-together when I was in my early 20s. He had this easy charm back then, the kind that felt safe. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy. He listened. He laughed at the right moments. And when he looked at me, it felt like he was actually seeing me, not just a pretty shape in the room. We dated for a few years before getting married. Nothing extravagant, nothing viral-worthy. Just a small wedding with friends, family, and the kind of promises you believe because you're still young enough to think love by itself is a plan. At the beginning, our marriage was good. Not perfect, but steady. We had routines, Sunday grocery runs, a shared calendar. A little joke between us that every month, no matter how busy life got, we'd do one real date night. Phones down, conversation on, like we were still choosing each other. Then I got hired at Julia's marketing agency about 18 months ago, and my life shifted in a way I didn't notice until it was already happening. The agency felt like a dream on paper. A 5-hour workday, 6 weeks of paid vacation, pay that was higher than industry standard. Health insurance that didn't feel like a scam. But what shocked me most wasn't the benefits. It was Julia. She ran a team of around 40 people, but she didn't hide behind a glass wall or an assistant's clipboard. She sat at a regular desk like everyone else. She knew people's names. She reviewed work personally. She didn't lead by fear. She led by making everyone around her better. I came home talking about her constantly at first. Not in a fangirl way, more like relief. Like I'd finally found a workplace where being treated like a human wasn't something you had to earn. And Jerome, at the beginning, seemed interested in my stories in a normal way. He asked questions like, so she really started the company from scratch? Or, how does she keep the hours that short and still make money? Or, is she actually nice or is it just corporate nice? Normal husband questions. The kind that made me feel like he cared about my world. Then the company holiday party happened last December, and something inside Jerome shifted. I remember exactly what Julia wore that night. A burgundy dress, simple but elegant, her hair pulled into a sleek bun like she didn't need to try hard to look powerful because she already was. Jerome met her for 5 minutes. 5. And after that, I noticed small changes. At first, I told myself I was being silly. On the way home, he asked, casually, how old is she again? I answered, 39. He hummed like he was storing that information. Then, is she married? She's private, but I think yes, or maybe separated. Then, does she have kids? I shrugged. I don't know. Why? He laughed, but it didn't sound light. It sounded hungry. Just curious. The next morning, I caught him scrolling through the company Instagram account, zooming into photos, lingering on pictures Julia appeared in. And when he followed the account and started liking posts, I told myself it was harmless. Because what kind of woman suspects her husband over Instagram likes? Except it wasn't just likes. It became comments, fast, eager, like he needed Julia to see him. Great leadership, visionary, strong woman. And every time I saw his name under her photos, something in my chest tightened like a warning. But I swallowed it, because marriage teaches women to swallow things first. Around February, work became messy. Julia's divorce became public knowledge internally. Her ex-husband Tom owned 40% of the company and started showing up, trying to push longer hours and cut bonuses. Rumors spread that he'd left her for his 26-year-old personal trainer and was trying to force Julia to hire the trainer into the company. When I told Jerome that story at dinner, I expected him to react like anyone would, mild shock, casual sympathy. Instead, he paced our kitchen like it was personal. What an idiot, he kept muttering. Who leaves a woman like that? He said it over and over until it started to feel less like sympathy and more like fixation. I remember standing at the sink, hands in soapy water, watching him rant, and feeling something quiet inside me turn over. A thought I didn't want to name. My husband isn't just interested in my boss. He's starting to build a fantasy where she's the prize. And in fantasies, wives become background noise. After that night, the air in our apartment changed. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say this is where it broke. It was subtler than that, like humidity creeping in through cracks you didn't know were there, until suddenly everything felt heavier. Jerome started talking about Julia more than I did. At first, it was disguised as concern. Sounds like she's under a lot of stress, he'd say, leaning against the counter while I cooked. She must feel so betrayed. I can't imagine being that successful and having someone try to tear it down. I nodded. I agreed, because those things were true. But then his tone shifted. She's strong, though. You don't see women like that every day. She built something real. That's rare. The way he said rare stuck with me. Like women were collectibles. Like value was something you ranked. Then came the comparisons. Quiet ones. Indirect enough that if I called them out, I'd sound insecure. She's so composed under pressure, he said once, after I vented about a stressful meeting. I admire that kind of emotional control. I laughed it off, even though my stomach dropped. Another time, after I mentioned Julia had personally reviewed a campaign I worked on, he smiled too widely. She must have high standards, he said. She probably expects excellence from everyone around her. Everyone around her. Not employees, not staff. Around her. I started noticing how often his phone was in his hand. He stopped scrolling aimlessly and started searching. If Julia posted something, even something boring like a conference photo or a charity run, Jerome saw it within minutes. He knew her schedule better than I did. She works out every morning, he mentioned casually one night. Across from your office, right? I froze. How do you know that? I asked. He shrugged. You've mentioned it before. I hadn't, not really, not enough for him to say it so confidently. Another time I caught him staring at his phone, smiling faintly. What's funny? I asked. He turned the screen away instinctively before realizing there was nothing to hide. Oh, just a post. Julia shared something about leadership. Makes sense. I started feeling like I was living with a stranger who happened to wear my husband's face. The intimacy between us thinned. Not because we fought, but because he wasn't present. When we talked, it felt like I was interrupting a thought he was already having about someone else. When I touched his arm, he flinched once, just barely, like he hadn't expected me to be there. I told myself I was overthinking, that this was what happens when admiration goes unchecked for too long. But then he said something that lodged itself deep under my skin. We were talking about Julia's divorce again, how her ex-husband had left her for someone younger. I made an offhand comment, trying to keep things light. Well, men do tend to go for younger women when given the choice. Jerome laughed. Not kindly. Only insecure men, he said. Only guys who can't handle a real woman. The words hit me sideways. I was only a year younger than him, and suddenly I felt small, unfinished, like I existed in a category he'd already mentally grown out of. I watched him talk about Julia that night, his voice animated, his eyes bright, and I realized something terrifying. He spoke about her the way he used to speak about me, with curiosity, with admiration, with hunger. And I, his wife, had become the one listening politely from across the room. The conflict hadn't exploded yet, but it was planted, rooted, growing quietly between us while I stood there, pretending I couldn't hear it, pushing up through the floor. The night everything finally surfaced didn't begin with a fight. It began with popcorn. We were at the movie theater for our monthly date night, the one ritual I had fought to protect even as everything else between us thinned out. I remember thinking, if we can just sit in the dark together for 2 hours, maybe we'll remember who we were. We were standing in the lobby, waiting for our order, when I felt it before I saw it. That shift in the air, that instinctive tightening in my chest. Then I followed Jerome's gaze. Julia stood by the ticket counter, laughing softly at something the young man beside her had said. He looked relaxed, familiar with her space. His hand brushed her arm casually, not possessively, just comfortably. And Jerome froze. Not metaphorically, physically. His shoulders locked, his jaw tightened, his breath caught like he'd been punched. I watched my husband forget where he was. Forget me. He leaned forward without realizing it, his body already moving toward her like gravity had taken over. I reached out and grabbed his arm. Jerome, I said quietly, trying not to make a scene. What are you doing? I just want to say hi, he murmured, eyes never leaving her. Hi. Like she was his colleague, like she was his friend, like she was someone who belonged in his life. I pulled him away from the lobby doors and walked him outside before he could protest. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. We're leaving, I said. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time that night. What? Why? His tone wasn't confused. It was irritated, like I'd taken something away from him. I didn't answer. I just walked to the car. The drive home was silent in the loudest way possible. Every red light stretched. Every mile felt like distance I couldn't cross back. The moment we stepped inside our apartment, Jerome went straight for his phone. Not to check on me, not to ask if I was okay. To search. I stood there watching him scroll, fast, frantic, until he found what he was looking for. A photo on Julia's personal Instagram. A family picture. The young man from the theater stood beside her, arms slung around her shoulders. Jerome exhaled like he'd been holding his breath underwater. Oh, he said, smiling, it's just her nephew. Just. His shoulders relaxed, his face softened. Relief flooded him so openly it felt obscene. I felt something break inside me. You're in love with her, I said. The words came out calm, too calm. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. What? That's ridiculous. I gestured toward his phone. You stalk her online. You wanted to approach her in public. You're relieved she wasn't on a date. And you're standing in front of your wife acting like that's normal. He shook his head. You're paranoid. You're imagining things. I walked past him toward our bedroom. He followed, talking, too fast, too loud, about how much he loved me, how I was his girl, how I was overreacting. I locked myself in the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. He kept talking through the door, and then he said the thing that destroyed whatever doubt I still had. It's not like someone like her would ever look my way anyway. Like loyalty was conditional. Like fidelity was something he granted because he didn't qualify for better. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. If he thought Julia was out of his league, what did that make me? By morning, my decision was already made. When Jerome came into the kitchen, still trying to act normal, I told him to leave. Not forever, at least not in those words. Just, I need space. My parents told me I was overreacting. My best friend said it was probably just a crush. But I knew the truth in my bones. My husband hadn't cheated yet. But he had already left, emotionally, mentally, deliberately. And once someone starts building a life in their head without you in it, the marriage is already over. The apartment felt wrong after Jerome left. Not empty, wrong. Like the walls had memorized his presence and were now confused about where to put the silence. His shoes were still by the door. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. The couch still carried the faint outline of where he used to lean back, arms stretched, like the space belonged to him. And I kept wondering how someone could physically leave so little behind and still take so much. The first day, I barely moved. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, my phone face down, and let the shock move through me in slow waves. I wasn't hysterical, I wasn't screaming, I wasn't sobbing into pillows. I was hollow. Every few minutes, my brain tried to bargain. Maybe I misread it. Maybe it really was harmless. Maybe I should have handled it differently. That voice, the one trained to self-correct, to self-blame, worked overtime. By the second day, the guilt arrived. Had I talked too much about Julia? Had I made her sound too impressive? Had I unknowingly handed my husband the blueprint for obsession? I replayed every dinner conversation, every casual mention of work, every compliment I'd ever given my boss, the way women are taught to do, scrutinizing ourselves for the moment we accidentally caused our own harm. Jerome texted, short messages at first. I can't believe you kicked me out over nothing. You're really going to throw away our marriage. This is fixable if you stop being dramatic. I didn't respond. Then the messages changed tone. I miss you. You're my person. I love you. I stared at those words until they lost meaning. Because love doesn't make room for someone else like that. Love doesn't need to reassure itself by ranking women. Love doesn't stare past its wife in a movie theater. After a week, we agreed to couples counseling. Not because I believed it would fix us, but because part of me needed to know I had tried everything reasonable before letting go. The first few sessions were convincing. Jerome showed up. He spoke softly. He apologized for making me feel insecure. He framed everything as a misunderstanding, my emotions, my interpretation, my sensitivity. The therapist asked him directly if he had feelings for Julia. He hesitated. Just long enough. No, he said finally. I admire her, that's all. The hesitation screamed louder than the word. Still, I tried. I did the exercises. I spoke honestly. I named how invisible I'd felt. I named how lonely it was to watch my husband mentally invest in someone else while insisting I was imagining it. For 3 weeks, it felt like maybe we were stabilizing. Then Jerome started canceling. Work ran late. I forgot. Next week, okay? By week 4, he stopped responding to scheduling emails altogether. And then, silence. No texts, no calls, no explanations. Just absence. I kept going to work because I had to. Because rent doesn't care about betrayal. Because health insurance doesn't pause for emotional devastation. I rarely saw Julia directly. She managed too many people. She had too many meetings. If anything, she seemed distant, professional, unaware. That almost made it worse. I started to believe maybe I'd been wrong. Until one night, Jerome's brother posted an Instagram story. A dimly lit restaurant, a table for 2. Jerome's hand, my husband's hand, interlaced with a woman's across the table. Only the hand was visible. But I knew. I commented without thinking. What the hell? The next morning, my phone rang. Jerome's name flashed across the screen. His voice was panicked, words tumbling over each other. Please don't ruin this for me. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Don't tell her, he said. Don't tell Julia about us. The world tilted. Her. Not someone, not a woman, not anyone else. Julia. The woman he'd obsessed over. The woman he'd compared me to. The woman he'd claimed was out of his league. He rushed to explain. Dating app, coincidence, timing, like details could soften betrayal. She doesn't know you work for her, he said quickly. I told her I was getting divorced. I laughed. It came out sharp and broken. So you're asking me to lie, I said, so you can keep her. He didn't deny it. Instead, he blamed me. You're the one who left, he said. People fall out of love. It's not anyone's fault. Then he made his final offer. I'll give you everything you want in the divorce, he said. Just don't hurt us. That's when I knew. This wasn't a crush. This wasn't a phase. This was a man who had rewritten his life and needed me silent so the story would make sense. I didn't tell Julia right away. Not because Jerome deserved mercy, but because fear is practical, and I was still employed by the woman my husband had just left me for. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jerome's face in the movie theater lobby, how his body had leaned toward her before his mind could catch up, how natural it had felt to him, how practiced. By morning, something inside me hardened. Not anger. Clarity. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't be protecting anyone. I'd be participating in a lie that could hurt someone else the same way it had hurt me. So on Monday morning, after the team meeting, I asked Julia if we could speak privately. She looked surprised, but not annoyed. Of course, she said. Let's talk at lunch. Her office was calm in that way powerful spaces are. Clean lines, neutral colors, no clutter. It felt like walking into someone else's stability while mine was actively collapsing. I sat across from her, hands folded so tightly my knuckles went white. I didn't start with Jerome. I started with admiration. I told her how much I respected the company, how working there had changed the way I saw my own career, how I had talked about her at home, not inappropriately, just often, because it mattered to me. Then I told her the truth. All of it. The holiday party, Jerome's fixation afterward, the Instagram searches, the movie theater, the separation. I told her my marriage was over, that I wasn't there to cause drama or interfere with her personal life. I just thought you deserved the full picture, I said quietly, especially since he told me you met on Bumble. That's when her expression changed. Not dramatically, just focused. That's not how we met, she said. My stomach dropped. She leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. He's been a member at my gym for 8 months, she continued, the one across the street from our office. The room felt smaller. Jerome had told me his gym was near our apartment, not my workplace. He had switched gyms. Deliberately, quietly, intentionally. Julia looked just as shaken as I felt. He started conversations, she said slowly. Nothing inappropriate at first, just small talk. We ran into each other often enough that it felt natural. Manufactured. Calculated. I apologized, again, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay composed. She thanked me. Not perfunctorily. Genuinely. I need time to process this, she said. But I appreciate your honesty. I left her office shaking, the world suddenly sharper around the edges. That evening, Jerome was waiting for me at my apartment. I hadn't told him where I lived after he moved out. He'd found me anyway. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unwashed, his voice loud before the door even closed. You're bitter, he snapped. Vindictive. You couldn't stand that I was finally happy. I stood there, stunned by how quickly he'd rewritten reality. You ruined everything, he continued. She thinks I'm a stalker now. She's scared of me. That's on you. I told him to leave. He demanded I call Julia and explain that he wasn't dangerous, that I had initiated the divorce, that he'd done nothing wrong. I told him any further contact would go through lawyers. 2 days later, Julia asked to speak with me again. She apologized for what I was going through. She assured me my job was safe. Then she did something I didn't expect. She protected herself. She blocked Jerome on every platform. She changed gyms. She contacted the gym manager about restricting access. And slowly the consequences began to roll downhill toward the man who thought he could control every narrative. Jerome started calling from different numbers. Emails followed, subject lines swinging wildly between please and you'll regret this. I filtered them into a folder my therapist helped me set up. Something contained. Something manageable. I moved in with my sister temporarily. I needed walls that didn't echo. Then came the final twist in the escalation. A coworker forwarded me an email from a competing marketing agency. Jerome had been hired as a business development manager. Same building as Julia's old gym. The dots connected instantly. I showed Julia. She went quiet. That afternoon, she called an emergency meeting with the legal team. A week later, a company-wide email announced she had successfully purchased her ex-husband's shares. Another followed, new non-compete and confidentiality agreements. Jerome had gambled proximity for power, and lost both. Soon after, Julia told me the truth. She had filed a restraining order. Jerome had started showing up again, sending emails, crossing lines. 3 days later, he was fired. His brother called me in tears, worried about Jerome's mental state. Then came the intimidation attempt, a legal letter accusing me of defamation. My lawyer shut it down in 1 page. The escalation ended not with a bang, but with exposure. Jerome had built his obsession quietly. And now, quietly, it was collapsing around him. The thing about escalation is that it convinces you the worst is already over. It isn't. The darkest moment didn't arrive with Jerome yelling at my door, or with the restraining order, or even with the realization that my marriage had been built on a lie I didn't consent to. It arrived quietly, in an envelope, slipped under my sister's apartment door. I remember standing in her hallway, keys still in my hand, staring at the cream-colored paper like it might move on its own. My name was written across the front in Jerome's handwriting. Careful, neat, familiar. That's what made my stomach drop. I hadn't given him my sister's address, which meant he'd found it. I sat on the couch while my sister hovered nearby, arms crossed like she could physically shield me if something went wrong. The room smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, normal things that suddenly felt too fragile to exist alongside what I was holding. The letter was long, pages and pages. At first it was accusatory. I was cold, I was manipulative, I had destroyed his life. Then it shifted. Suddenly, I was the problem standing between him and happiness, between him and Julia, between him and the life he deserved. He wrote about her in obsessive detail, her discipline, her intelligence, the way she understood him in ways no one else ever had. He wrote as if I were an obstacle, a gatekeeper, a necessary evil. The final paragraph made my hands shake. He wanted me to arrange a meeting between him and Julia, so he could explain his side, so she could see the truth, so I could finally do the right thing. I didn't finish the letter. I couldn't. I folded it carefully, like it might explode if I wasn't gentle, and handed it to my lawyer the next morning. We filed a police report. The officer was calm, measured, but his eyes lingered on the method of delivery. "This isn't explicitly threatening," he said, "but the fact that he tracked down this address is concerning. Document everything." Everything. That word echoed. I started documenting my own life like evidence. Screenshots, dates, times, missed calls, emails. I stopped sleeping deeply. Every sound outside felt like a question mark. Every unfamiliar car slowed my breath. Julia had a restraining order. I didn't, and that knowledge sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't shift. At work, I performed. Not because I felt strong, but because routine was the only thing keeping me upright. Meetings, deadlines, deliverables, small, controllable wins. Julia never mentioned Jerome again. That silence was its own kind of kindness. But at night, in my sister's guest room, the doubt crept in. Did I make it worse by telling her? Would he have spiraled like this anyway? Did I trigger something I should have foreseen? Those questions are dangerous. They make you feel responsible for someone else's instability. They make you wonder if silence would have been safer. I sat on the floor one night, back against the bed, and cried, not loud, not dramatically, just enough to let the grief leak out without shattering me. I mourned my marriage. Not the man Jerome had become, but the one I thought I married. I mourned the version of myself who believed admiration couldn't curdle into obsession. I mourned safety, because safety is the first thing betrayal takes. It doesn't just break your heart, it rewires your instincts. I realized then that I couldn't stay where I was. Not because I was weak, but because survival sometimes looks like distance. The darkest moment wasn't fear, it was understanding. Understanding that the man I once trusted had crossed a line I could never uncross, and that no amount of explaining, mediating, or forgiving would bring back the version of him that never existed in the first place. I didn't know what the next step was yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done trying to manage someone else's obsession at the cost of my own peace. The decision to leave didn't arrive like a dramatic announcement. It arrived as a quiet sentence in my head while I was staring at my sister's kitchen window at 6 a.m, watching sunlight creep across the floor. I can't live like this anymore. Not in fear, not in vigilance, not in reaction mode. The turning point wasn't about Jerome. It was about me finally choosing to stop orbiting the chaos he created. I called Julia later that week and told her I was considering relocating, closer to my parents, farther from the building, the gym, the routines Jerome had learned how to infiltrate. She surprised me. "Would remote work help?" she asked calmly. I blinked. "Remote permanently?" "We've been piloting flexible work options," she said. "Your performance has been consistent. Your professionalism through all of this hasn't gone unnoticed." Something inside my chest loosened. Not relief exactly, validation. That I hadn't imagined my own resilience. That I hadn't become less because of what happened. I accepted. 2 months later, I packed my life into labeled boxes and moved to a small apartment 300 miles away from the version of myself that had learned to flinch. The new place was smaller, quieter, safer. I set up a home office near a window, bought a plant I somehow kept alive, learned the rhythm of a new grocery store, a new coffee shop, a new neighborhood that didn't know my history. Distance worked, not like magic, but like medicine. Julia checked in, not intrusively, not emotionally, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone in navigating professional consequences I never asked for. Work stabilized. So did my nervous system. Then Jerome tried one last time. He showed up at our old apartment building weeks after I'd moved out. Asked neighbors if they knew where I'd gone. One of them called me immediately. I drove away without stopping. Security footage confirmed it was him. My lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to his last known address. Clear, firm, documented. His brother called afterward. Apologized. Again. This time, his voice sounded tired. "Jerome started seeing a psychiatrist," he said. "They think he has obsessive tendencies. He's not doing well, but he's getting help." I thanked him and set a boundary. I didn't want updates, just confirmation that Jerome would stay away. That was it. The real turning point came later, unexpectedly, over dinner. Julia was in my city for a conference and invited me out. Just 2 women, no tension, no subtext. At some point, the conversation drifted, naturally, toward Jerome. She told me something she hadn't shared before. When she confronted him about lying about how they met, he claimed joining her gym had been a coincidence. She hadn't believed him. Later, she found old company newsletters in his apartment, ones featuring photos of her at charity runs sponsored by that specific gym. Evidence, not speculation. Evidence. Hearing it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It grounded me, because doubt thrives in the absence of facts. And now I had them. That night, walking back to my apartment, I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about Jerome all day. Not once. No fear, no anger, no mental rehearsals. Just space. The obsession that once filled my marriage had finally lost its gravity. The turning point wasn't Jerome losing his job, or Julia filing a restraining order, or the legal paperwork. It was me reclaiming my narrative, understanding that I could leave, that I could rebuild, that I could choose peace without needing permission from the person who tried to take it from me. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in fragments, quiet confirmations that the story Jerome had tried to control was no longer his to edit. It started with his job. 3 days after Julia filed the restraining order, Jerome was terminated from the competing agency. Officially, it was framed as a policy violation. Unofficially, everyone understood what that meant. He had crossed lines, professional ones, personal ones, legal ones. His brother told me Jerome was convinced that Julia and I had conspired against him, that we had coordinated to ruin his career, his reputation, his future. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so disturbing, because the truth was simpler. Jerome had destroyed his own life by believing proximity entitled him to access, and access entitled him to control. The legal consequences followed quietly. His attorney sent a letter accusing me of defamation, an attempt to intimidate, nothing more. My lawyer responded with documentation, timelines, messages, witness statements, security footage. The letter disappeared. So did Jerome's confidence. He didn't fight the divorce in the end. He signed everything, agreed to an even split, didn't argue over furniture, appliances, or savings. At first, that confused me. Then I understood. He needed the marriage to be over so he could rewrite it as something that had ended naturally, something mutual, something clean. But the fallout didn't stop with paperwork. Julia's company moved forward, stronger than before. She completed the buyout of her ex-husband's shares, strengthened confidentiality policies, expanded the remote work program. I was promoted and placed on a high-profile international campaign. Not as a reward, as a recognition. She told me something during a check-in that stayed with me. You didn't let your personal crisis bleed into your professional integrity, she said. That's rare. I didn't tell her how hard that had been. How some mornings I'd logged into meetings with my hands shaking just outside the camera frame. How often I'd muted myself to breathe. The fallout for Jerome, though, kept rippling. His brother reached out once more, not to apologize, but to explain. Jerome had moved to Arizona to live with their parents. He'd been formally diagnosed with obsessive tendencies. Therapy was ongoing. Boundaries were being enforced. I'll make sure he doesn't contact you again, his brother promised. I believed him, not because Jerome had changed overnight, but because consequences finally existed. The last message I ever received from Jerome came weeks later, from an unknown number. You ruined my life. I hope you're happy. I saved it and didn't respond, because happiness isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't need to prove itself. The real fallout wasn't his. It was mine, and it was strangely peaceful. I rebuilt routines, Sunday dinners with my parents, morning walks with no destination, therapy sessions where I stopped talking about Jerome and started talking about me. I declined dates without guilt. I let myself be cautious without feeling broken. One afternoon, while organizing files in my home office, I found my final divorce decree. I held it for a moment, then filed it away. No tears, no ceremony, just closure. The fallout wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about watching the truth stand on its own while I walked away without needing to narrate it. Jerome lost access to me, to Julia, to the version of life he thought he could claim. I gained something quieter, autonomy, safety, and the knowledge that I could survive betrayal without becoming smaller because of it. I used to think the end of a marriage would feel like an explosion, like something loud, final, obvious. Instead, it felt like setting something heavy down after carrying it for far too long. I live in a small apartment now, nothing extravagant. A desk by the window, a plant I water every morning, a calendar that belongs entirely to me. Some days are still quiet in a way that aches, but it's a clean ache, the kind that heals instead of festers. Work is steady, meaningful. I'm trusted again, not just by my boss, but by myself. Julia's company continues to thrive. The remote work program has expanded. I've become an example in meetings, not because of what I survived, but because of how I showed up despite it. That distinction matters. I don't date yet, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm careful. Trust, I've learned, isn't something you rush back into just because you miss companionship. It's something you rebuild slowly, on your own terms. Sometimes I think about Jerome, not with anger, not with longing, more like remembering someone I once knew, someone who made choices I couldn't follow, who crossed lines I wouldn't forgive. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. The lesson I carry forward isn't about betrayal. It's about attention, about how obsession doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with curiosity that's allowed to grow unchecked, about how admiration becomes dangerous when it erases the people closest to you, and about how leaving isn't failure. Sometimes leaving is the first honest thing you do for yourself. If you're listening to this and you recognize pieces of your own life in mine, if you've ever felt invisible beside someone who promised to love you, know this. You don't have to wait for proof that breaks you. You're allowed to trust your instincts. You're allowed to choose peace. I didn't ruin anyone's life. I told the truth. And then I built a future that doesn't require me to disappear to keep someone else comfortable. That feels like enough. That is enough.